Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer and today's video is all about why I believe that right now in 2026 we should all be rich, and the fact that we're not is a tragedy. And I'm actually talking about like the poorest person in Bangladesh to, a middle class renter living in Austin, Texas, aka me, anybody all around the world. We could be way richer than we currently are.
Hello, I like money.
Now, before we dive into the reasons of why I believe we could all be far richer than we are, yes, let me acknowledge the fact that technically, compared to people from 30 years ago, 90 years ago, we, or a lot of us, a huge percentage of the world, we're all kind of rich if you compare us to people in the past. Like, so many more houses now have air conditioning when barely any houses had air conditioning in the past. Way more people in the world get 3 meals a day plus snacks, when a lot of people back in the day were lucky if they got 1 meal per day. All of these things that, that we have, but the other people didn't have, that technically it's like, whoa, if people from the past saw us, they would think we're rich, even though we don't feel rich. But compared to them, they would think we're rich, right? And obviously, we have to thank human ingenuity for this, and we have to thank the governments who stepped out of the way to let these people create these great things for us. But that is not the only thing that creates wealth and improves our lives. There's actually something that is very important and that I sort of recently discovered, not recently, like not last week, like a few years ago. It really sank, and lately it's been like becoming more and more evident. But the real reason I believe we are not as rich as we could be has a lot to do with environmentalism. Obviously, I didn't arrive to this conclusion on my own. A few years ago, I ended up doing some work that involved, it was a video editing work that involved reading a lot of transcripts from interviews by Alex Epstein. If you don't know, well, most of you know, but Alex Epstein is an energy expert that writes in favor of the use of fossil fuels. And he has 2 books. I've actually never read them, but now I low-key feel that I don't need to, because like I said, I had this job, this editing job, video editing job, where I had to read dozens and dozens of transcripts of his interviews so that I could know how to properly edit the videos. And from reading these transcripts, I just started absorbing his message, and it all started to click, like, wow, the positives of fossil fuels and blah, 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 is what has led me to be like, wait, we be way richer than we are in general all over the world if we just use more fossil fuels. Like, this is what I imagine. The people who live in slums, they could live in nice 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom brick homes. The people who live in brick homes could be living in a nice mini mansion. People who currently live in mini mansions, they could be living in a giant mansion. Like, that's how I think more access to fossil fuels could enrich us all in general. And why do I say this? Well, because as Alex Epstein explains it in these dozens and dozens of transcripts I had to read, basically, as he puts it, the energy industry is the industry that powers every other industry, right? So to the extent that we're allowed, or maybe not me, because I'm creating absolutely nothing physically, but to the extent that the people who are actually creating things are allowed to use fossil fuels, that is the extent that they'll be able to innovate, right? So if they had unlimited access and way less restrictions on their use of fossil fuels, imagine the things they could create. Imagine how much more fuel we could have. If we had more fuel will be cheaper. Therefore, we could fill up our car for $10 instead of $30, and then we will have extra $20 to use on other things we like every week. But then not only that, since there will be more fossil fuel, everything would just be cheaper to make, and it would cost us less to buy it. Therefore, we will have extra money. And Even things are usually expensive. Building houses, creating cars, that would also cost less because all of these things are in some way or another made of fossil fuels or thanks to the power of fossil fuels. So everything would be cheaper, we could afford way more, our standard of living could be much higher. And once you realize that, it's like, and when you realize that the governments are actively trying to reduce our use of fossil fuels and just making it harder for people who are creating things to create things because they give them more rules, they have to pay more fees, and then they're creating this narrative that fossil fuels are destroying the world when really they would make all of us richer. Like, that's infuriating. Like, yes, I live a seemingly comfortable life, like I mentioned earlier, a seemingly comfortable middle class life here in Austin, but knowing that it could be way better, that I could have way more abundant money, a way better house, that I could be taking more vacations in a year, and that I would have to witness less pain and suffering because other people wouldn't have it as bad because they would also be wealthier. And the fact that that's not the case because we are blocked and because there's constant campaigns to stop us from or reducing our use of fossil fuels, that, as I said, is infuriating. And you know what's interesting is that usually the people who are advocating for more equality, for less poverty, the social justice warriors, they're also the ones campaigning against fossil fuels, which is like, wait, if you want less poverty and more access to goods all around the world, you should be advocating for unleashing fossil fuels and more fossil fuel production. That way, the standard of living all around the world would rise. Like, low-key, they're the most responsible for the poorest in the poorest countries to stay poor. Okay, maybe they're not fully responsible because obviously their own governments, these people who live in this, who had the bad luck of being born in these countries, a lot of their governments are keeping them in that level too. So it's not just the blocking the fossil fuels, it's also their society. Like, knowing that my loved ones could have a much higher standard of living, they could afford more things, better things, even lengthen their life with more access to energy, because like the more fossil fuels you have, like the more you can innovate, the more you can create life lengthening technologies, you can have more cancer research, you can have more diabetes research, you can find more cures, all of that. Life, or like the length of our life, can like really be impacted by how much energy freedom we have, right? So when you think about all of that, it's like, because every human life is special, unique, we only get to experience it once, and the fact that some people, their one chance at life is like pretty miserable, it's unfair and sad, and it's even worse when you know that it could be very different. Now, if you have the common objections like, yeah, wouldn't it be nice to have more energy, but we have to be realistic because fossil fuels have side effects, blah, 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 blah. If you still believe that fossil fuels have catastrophic effects or side effects, I invite you to delve into Epstein's work. As I mentioned, he has a lot of videos that talk about this and that debunk or refute these arguments. I'm not saying there aren't side effects or that there's no using fossil fuels doesn't impact climate, but is it catastrophic? Is it worth stopping the use of fossil fuels? I'm not gonna try to explain this because if you want all the facts, like go read Alex's work. But yes, this is the point of this video. It was just me to rant about why I'm triggered that we are not rich. I'm personally not more rich, and I've been holding on to this script for maybe 2 years. I just hadn't got it around to it, and also it wasn't fully fleshed out before, but I can procrastinate. But now I'm glad I finally recorded because my triggerness has reached its level, a high level where I'm like, wish I was richer. And I wish everybody was richer. Imagine if we combined an unleashing of the energy industry with more fossil fuels, and also combine that with governments having just generally less regulations in production. Maybe there will be way more millionaires and way less poors. Yes, I am triggered, but also I kind of like to pause sometimes and remind myself that I'm still pretty lucky. Like I like to practice gratitude, and I'm thankful that I was born in this age and not 50 years ago, 200 years ago, and thanks to the people from the past, I live a very comfortable life, a relatively comfortable life, but also it's still okay to be triggered that in general we don't have more. That is all for today. New video coming someday, maybe.